So how have you been? You said you were in Iceland, Antarctic, somewhere up north?
Yeah, I was in Iceland last week. So there's this recent eruption that started midway through March. And
Mhm.
it's a really exciting eruption because it's a brand new eruption. It's not an old volcano that had been quiet for a while. It's sort of fresh out of nowhere. So you get to see lava sort of covering areas of the land that haven't seen lavas in hundreds of years.
Mhm. That's cool.
Yeah.
Um, okay.
Well, I can say the scientific reason why we were there if you're curious, because I work on microbes. So the question that we had was there are lots of hot springs on the flanks of these volcanoes, and so one of the outstanding questions that we really don't have a good handle on is how much do seismicity or earthquakes or volcanic eruptions drive changes in the subsurface geochemistry that drive fluid movements? How, do they matter for these subsurface microbial ecosystems? So we were there to discuss that.
I think that's a cool topic that you're researching. And how long was the trip? Was it like a few months, or were you just up there for
4 days?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was really short. This is maybe I can give like a plug for Iceland, but it's Iceland. A big part of their economy has always been tourism, and so that's of course taken a hit with COVID. But they were one of the first countries to say vaccinated people are welcome, and so it's very organized. It's a short trip. They're only 4 hours ahead of the East Coast because they're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. They're not as far as Europe,
Yeah.
so you can actually find pretty cheap tickets too. And this volcano that has recently started erupting is a short drive, like an hour away from the main city of Reykjavik. So, and it's very photogenic.
Okay, yeah.
It's one of the most beautiful volcanoes I've ever seen. I mean, it's just totally lovely, and it's not posing any sort of hazard. So it's a very polite volcano. So if you have the itch to travel and you're vaccinated, I highly, highly recommend finding yourself a cheap flight and going to Iceland.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been in Knoxville for the past few weeks, and during the weekend, I've been going to the Smoky Mountains and the Appalachian Trail. So that's kind of been my getaway.
Very nice. Yeah, it's gorgeous. Did you enjoy it?
It was good. I went for the past 2 weekends, and one of the weekends we ended up hiking about 15 miles. And backpacking and camping. And then the other weekend we hiked about 12 miles. So I've enjoyed it, and it's nice. The weather's great, and the views are great. So
Smoky Mountains are awesome.
Yeah. All right. So starting the podcast, I wanted to ask a little bit about your background and try to get a little introduction into how you got into microbiology and how you got to where you are.
So I really got interested in microbiology when I did a summer course as a high school student at North Carolina Central University. There was a PhD student there who told us that microbes are not just the things that cause disease, that they're actually these like secret superpowered engines that are driving a lot of Earth systems. They're running all the parts of our body. They're involved in almost everything important going on in Earth systems. And I just was hooked when I was a high school student. I just found that fascinating, that they're these often invisible sort of beings working behind the scenes to make things go. I'm just in awe of the power of them.
Yeah. And when you started in undergrad and in grad school, is there a difference between studying microbiology as an undergrad and then as a grad student and then a fellow postgrad student? Like what is the transition, or how does the study of microbiology differ from an undergrad to a doctoral student?
Yeah. Well, I myself have never studied microbiology.
Okay.
I did biochemistry as an undergrad, and then I did oceanography. It's called Marine Sciences, the program that I did at the University of North Carolina. So I I came to microbiology laterally from
Okay.
programs. But I mean, I'm now a professor in a microbiology department, so I know what it's like because I teach the undergrads now in microbiology. But I think that the answer to that question is the same as the answer for any other field, where when you're an undergrad, you're learning about a wide breadth of things in this field. And then when you do a master's or a PhD, you're really narrowing in and becoming an expert in just a part of it.
Mm-hmm. And when you were doing your grad school work, were you also going to different, like for example, studying oceanography? Were you going to different like Atlantic or Pacific oceans and getting samples as well?
Mm-hmm. I went to both of those oceans in my PhD. No, I guess I just went to the Pacific Ocean, and the Gulf of Mexico was where I did my work for my PhD.
Okay, cool. And getting into some of the extreme microbes that you study. So you've studied in the past microbes that from Costa Rica, like the volcanoes of Costa Rica. You were saying you were in Iceland. And were you also in Svalbard in Norway?
Yeah.
That's really cool, because the only thing I know about Svalbard is like it's the northernmost country and it holds like a seed vault for all the seeds.
Yeah.
Can you talk about like one, being in some of these extreme environments and getting a chance to study the microbes in those environments?
Yeah. So Svalbard is not actually a country.
Oh.
It's It's a territory that is officially given to Norway to administer. The Treaty of Versailles gave it to Norway. But there's part of the treaty, part of the agreement is that Norway, it's not technically Norway. So they can't, they don't have full sovereignty to the territory. So there's a city in Svalbard that is Russian. Russian, and it actually is administered by Russia. So it's a weird, it's a very, like, it's strange to be sort of outside of governments there. And so we went, Norway is actually closed. I'm actually not sure about today, but at the time that we went in March, it was closed to anyone from the United States, whether you were vaccinated or not, or whether you tested negative for COVID. You just were not allowed to go to Norway. But we found a loophole because the governor of Svalbard said, actually, I'm making an exception for researchers coming to study Svalbard. And I'm making a request. So we had a letter, we held these letters, clutched these letters in our hands when our plane landed all groggy, and presented them to the border patrol people or the border officer people. And it said, basically the governor acknowledged that they did not have the rights to demand that Norway let us in for the purposes of quarantining on our way to Svalbard, but would they please do it?
Yeah.
So they did. They let us in. And so we got to hang out in hotel rooms for 10 days in Oslo, which is actually really lovely.
Yeah.
And then we went up to Svalbard, which is a really, truly amazing, one-of-a-kind place. Very cool.
It's great that you get to see like all these like different like locations. I think that's one of the coolest parts of what you do. What about the microbes that you've sampled in these locations? Are there any similarities between the microbes that are living in the cold environments versus the hot environments?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how far back in the evolutionary time you want to go. I mean, at some point, everything's related. But we do see, we'll see things from the same phylum for sure in these different types of places. But we tend to see pretty different microbial communities. I mean, they are specialized enough that we don't see full overlap in the types of microbes that we see in places that are hot versus cold.
And have you studied how these microbes are able to survive in like high versus low temperature, different oxygen levels, different pressures? Have they, because when you look at them, they're the size of less than a nanometer or so, or a few nanometers.
They're bigger than that. They're usually about a micron.
A micron, okay. And so I would think that in these harsh conditions, they would just be wiped out. But how have they been able to survive these extreme environments? Do you know?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different strategies for dealing with different sorts of extremes. And we actually can learn a lot about it from microbes that are found just, in our guts or in sort of normal places, because those microbes need to be able to deal with extreme environments sometimes too. To E. coli that wants to make us sick after it's been, released out into the rivers, it needs to be able to survive osmotic shock because it really wants to live in our guts with salt. And so it has to deal with no salt out in the rivers so that it can infect us again. So we've learned that from those ones, but there's certain things like archaea have very special lipid membranes. So if you learned like the standard way to build a lipid membrane in all of animal cells and bacteria is that we have these ether-linked lipids. I'm sorry, these glycerol-linked lipids. They have a different linkage. And in fact, the two sides of their lipid bilayer are actually connected to each other. And so it sort of makes them more stable. And they often have a big protein S layer outside them, which if you learned in microbiology, the difference between a gram positive and a gram negative, and for a long time we thought that all microbes could be either gram positive or gram negative. That's not true at all. Archaea are something else entirely. They don't have a big wall of peptidoglycan. They have a big wall of proteins instead. So these are sort of like part of their defenses. And there's plenty of like heat shock proteins and lots of machinery inside the cell to deal with heat and to refold proteins and stuff like that. There's just a lot, and a lot of these defense mechanisms have to do with making sure the membranes stay fluid without falling apart, and there's just a lot to it.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. Like when you look at some of these small organisms, they've been able to survive for millions of years in these kind of harsh conditions, and they're continuing to survive. I just think that's incredible. And with the microbes, are they able to communicate with the microbes that are next to them? Do they have some kind of symbiotic relationship in order for them to survive those conditions?
That is a really hard question to answer. We're working on that. I presume that they do, just because almost everything we see out in nature talks to each other. They have things like quorum sensing, which is basically like you send out a little signal flashing and saying, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And then when enough microbes get together and say, I'm here, then everybody all at once does a function together. It's like, okay, we have a quorum. Let's go forth and do the thing. So we see that happening at many levels in environmental microbes, and also symbioses where they depend on each other. And we've done some work where we inferred that there's some dependency on maybe sharing amino acids as a nutritional substrate between these starving microbes in 8,000-year-old sediment in the Baltic Sea. But it's a guess. I mean, we're inferring that based on what we see. I mean, we go pretty far to do it. I mean, we can pull out DNA, RNA, proteins, and metabolites from these cells as they are out in this 8,000-year-old sediment. So we can, when we look at that range of biomolecules, we basically have to knit together the cell and say, what was the cell state at the time of sampling? And we may be guessing wrong.